It's a Friday. Let's do a mock draft.
You are Locked On Cowboys, your daily Dallas Cowboys podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back to the Locked On Cowboys podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen of the day. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers can get $200 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. Welcome back. I am your host, Marcus Mosher. You can follow me on Twitter at Marcus_Mosher. Joining me today, as always, is Landon McCool. You can follow him on Twitter at McCoolBCB. It's a Friday. We've got no big Cowboy news. So, Landon, let's do a mock draft. What do you say?
Let's do it. I love doing these on a Friday. It takes us into the weekend. Nice, solid fun. I always enjoy it.
All right. So, when we do these mocks, we always try to come up with a different scenario. One of the ones we did earlier in the week was trading up from round 2 to try to get like a blue chip player, right? So basically 2 guys that the Cowboys might have graded in the first round. On today's show, we're going to do something different. We're going to go fresh faces, some names that we've maybe talked about, but haven't mocked to the Cowboys very frequently. So with that in mind, let's go to the mock. We are doing a mock through Pro Football Focus's mock draft simulator. If you're watching with us on YouTube, you can follow along. You can see who is available. I will do my best to try to keep everybody informed of who's on the clock or who's available and who's off the board. So in this mock, we have Cam Ward gone, Shedeur Sanders gone, Travis Hunter, Will Campbell, Abdul Carter, Mason Graham, Amar Membu, Ashton Genty, Tyler Warren, Jahdae Barron, and Will Johnson. That means we have Tetairoa McMillan available for us, Jihad Campbell, Luther Burden, Mike Green, James Pierce, Kenneth Grant, Matthew Golden. What's appealing to you?
So again, the point of this is to really get an opportunity to talk about some new names here, right? So obviously, probably 99% of the time, Ted McMillan's staring at us at 12. I'm probably going to go up there and take Ted McMillan. But for the case of this podcast, we're looking for other names that maybe the Cowboys would consider, because there's often times that we get on the clock, we talk about the same guys over and over again, and they take someone that we've covered, but we've only briefly discussed. So we just want to make sure we're getting some new names in here. I think the 2 names that I would like to discuss are Mike Green, edge from Marshall, and Kevin Banks, tackle guard from Texas. Right? I think that these are 2 guys that are, on my board as red chip players. I have them as kind of bottom of the first round folks, right? So maybe a little bit lower than where the Cowboys are picking, but there's always the chance that the Cowboys view these players just much differently than we do, or not even really, frankly, that much differently. They just have to view them half a round better than we do. So looking at Mike Green, normally when we talk about guys that the Cowboys are interested in, they are not always all in on kind of smaller school pass rushers, right? I do think that has changed recently. We've seen them kind of go after Marshawn Nealon, who was obviously not necessarily from a super high-end school.
Western Kentucky.
Yeah,
sorry,
exactly.
Western Michigan, I believe. Yep.
And so I do think that, Mike Green is a name that we should at least discuss, even though maybe he's not necessarily the body type fit of the defensive end that we've been looking at. His pass rush win rate is incredible. He had an incredible Senior Bowl, has really just kind of blown up the prospect process, right, of just getting ready for the draft. Has had a lot of buzz around him, has been steadily mentioned in the first round. I think, considering he plays a position of need, he's a name that we should at least be discussing, I think, as a potential Cowboys pick, even if he isn't necessarily what we would consider to be a perfect fit necessarily.
Yeah, we're thinking that the Cowboys would like to get some bigger defensive ends on this team, but Mike Green's not that, but he brings pass rushing upside. The other thing is, he's really active in the run game, 84 tackles last year for Marshall. So he's not one of these guys where if he's not getting a sack, he's not impacting the game, and he plays really hard. So I know there's some off-field concerns that the Cowboys would have to sign off on, but everything else suggests this is somebody that should be drafted inside the top 15. We should at least be mentioning him for Dallas.
Yeah, outside of the small school aspect and the off-field stuff that there's been some whispers of, he's had a pretty clean, kind of prospect process of this whole situation from, the All-Star games throughout the combine. So, if he kind of, clears a lot of those hurdles, I would not be shocked if, the Cowboys didn't have a lot of other options if they ended up going with Mike Green at 12. The other name that we also wanted to mention, I think, or at least I wanted to mention, was Banks. Is another guy who, at a position where, it's certainly worthy of taking of the 12th pick. I think he's a guy that has the kind of flexibility, I would think, to play inside if you needed him to. So if you wanted to draft him to play guard this year and then maybe kick him out to tackle next year, I think he could certainly do that. I just think that, there are other guys that we got more excited about, right? At least at the top of the draft that you'd hope would fall to you. I mean, I think I would rather talk about, an Armand Membu falling to us at 12 than feeling like we get to 12 and then have to kind of, I don't want to say reach for Kelvin Banks, but, not necessarily feel like that's an optimal value for the player. But I will say, if the Cowboys were to take a guy like Kelvin Banks, it makes a ton of sense because of his kind of versatility, because of what you saw on tape. I did think it was funny. Somebody pointed out on one of these national draft shows that it does feel like whenever you talk about some of these, especially the defensive interior prospects, that all the time you're like, man, they had a really great game against Texas. Like,
Yeah.
man, you got to go watch the Texas game.
I think it was Charles McDonald on the podcast.
That's what it was.
Yeah.
So thank you, because I do think that's a good call by Charles, right? Because I think it does feel that way. I don't know that that's necessarily on Kelvin Banks. I think that's more on his teammate Williams. I liked Banks a lot. I thought there was a lot to his game. I just felt like he was more of a bottom of the round type guy, but considering he's a potential tackle prospect, considering the chance that the Cowboys just see him differently, would not be shocked if he ended up being the 12th pick for the Cowboys.
All right, I wanted to mention a couple other names just really quickly that could be options for the Cowboys. One player that we have not talked about recently is Michael Williams, who ran a 4.77 at his pro day, still recovering from an ankle injury, but I think the floor is pretty high here. And if the Cowboys are looking for some more of these longer, athletic, strong defensive ends, I do think Michael Williams is somebody that we need to consider. There was some early buzz on him for the Cowboys as like, hey, this guy could be somebody the Cowboys are targeting. We just haven't talked about him a lot. So I don't want to rule him out because it still seems like the consensus is really, really high on him. And then what about Jalen Walker? He's somebody that I like a lot, Landon. Like, I am a big Jalen Walker fan. And you look at the consensus right now. On the overall consensus board, he's 7th. Nobody outside of PFF has them ranked outside of their top 8 players right now. Nobody.
Yeah, I've got him as a red chip player as well. I mean, I think the question is always going to be usage with him, right? Like, I mean, I don't know if I like him as an instinctual run and hit linebacker the way I like Jihad Campbell. I mean, I certainly think he could do that. That isn't the issue.
But that's
right?
not why you're drafting him.
But that's not, exactly. That's not why you would be drafting him in the top half of the first round if you were to do so. So the problem I would have with that is that I kind of feel like it's going to take all of Flus's creative juices to find a way to move Parsons around, because I don't know that that's necessarily something that he has done a ton of in his career. Flus, as far as moving guys around, right?
Yeah.
So if you add a second guy who kind of you feel like you have to move around to get the most out of him, it just feels like a hat on a hat. I mean, not that you certainly wouldn't want more than one Micah Parsons, but I do think that it suddenly becomes almost a burden, right? To like try to figure out ways to deploy both of these guys and then fit the rest of the 9 players behind him so that it all works. It certainly feels like a problem, a champagne problem.
I'm not saying it's a perfect fit in their defense, because it's not. But there could be. I wouldn't be surprised if you're just grading these players, or if you're just looking at the consensus board. Absolutely. You're sitting at 12, and Jalen Walker's the best player available, and maybe the Cowboys feel like, hey, we know it's not a perfect fit. We're going to have to figure it out, but he's too talented to pass up.
Yeah, and I think that I think you could make the similar arguments for Jihad Campbell too, except I think Campbell is sort of a maybe more clean fit because of his
Well,
ability to just play linebacker,
the
right?
problem is that Jihad Campbell has a significant injury history, and that's probably why he wouldn't be an option for the Cowboys at 12.
I mean, look, there are reasons that we haven't talked about several of
Yeah.
these players
Well, I
regularly
just
with the
think
Cowboys.
Walker's clean in terms of injuries and all that
Yeah,
kind of
for
stuff.
sure.
It just makes it a little harder.
It's
So
the projection of the fit, right?
all
Yeah.
right, so let's make our pick. Who do you want to take here at 12?
Let's take Mike Green. Let's just
Okay.
let's see what happens if we kind of do that. Again, this mock draft is not necessarily about like getting a realistic mock. It's more of
No.
a vehicle for us to have a conversation with y'all about some of these players. So don't judge us by the results here necessarily.
Yeah, let's take a look at some of the defensive backs that might be available to the Cowboys in round 2 of this mock. We will get to that next. This episode is brought to you by FanDuel. March Madness is here, and FanDuel is giving you the chance to get in on the action like never before. Right now, new customers can get $200 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. That is 200 extra bucks that you can use on everything from buzzer beaters to Cinderella stories to even who's cutting down the nets. We've got a busy weekend full of college basketball. I know I've got my favorites and a couple underdogs that I'm going to be backing. And FanDuel makes it easy to pick them with spreads, totals, and game props. And with tournament games happening all weekend long, there's always something fun and exciting to bet on. The FanDuel app is simple to use, and when you win, you get paid instantly. There's no waiting around. So visit FanDuel.com and get in on the college hoops action all tournament long. Welcome back to the Locked On Cowboys podcast. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen of the day. We are doing a mock draft simulator where we took Mike Green in round 1, a player that we haven't talked about a lot in this process. We did mention him early, like back in January as a potential option, but kind of circling back here to him at number 12. Landon, let's check in on the round 2 options. Omarion Hampton's available.
Oh, wow. That's pretty shocking.
I just saw a mock draft today from Eric Edholm where the Cowboys are taking him at 12. So not that. A couple of the other top players available: Demetrius Knight, Xavier Watts, Trey Amos, Maxwell Harrison, Siobhan Ravel, Jaden Higgins, Cam Scatabo. Probably not going to take another edge rusher. Xavier Restrepo, if you can run up there fast enough. Jack Sawyer, Elijah Arroyo. Anybody here you want to mention?
If you're running up to take Restrepo to the podium, you're probably going to beat him to the podium.
Yeah.
I think we should have a conversation about Ravel. I think it came out this week, or maybe it was a little bit earlier last week rather, that he has a visit with the Dallas Cowboys, and I think your tweet was about you beat me. Speaking of running up to the podium, your tweet beat me to the punch on that, because that was exactly what I was going to say. This guy seems like, just by his profile, to be the typical Dallas Cowboys second round pick. Please explain to us why, Marcus.
Well, the Cowboys love to draft talented players that fall to round 2 because of injury. Yeah. And for Ravel, he tore his ACL. I believe it was in week 3 of the college football season. Dr. Cooper did the surgery. That's the Dallas Cowboys doctor. So obviously they know him very well. The expectation is that he's going to be ready for training camp. The Cowboys have a need at corner. Like there's no doubt they have a need at corner. And I think if Ravel was fully healthy, he's a top 20, top 25 pick. Yeah. Maybe the Cowboys feel like they're getting a value here and a discount because of the injury.
Yeah, this is a player who has, really, really fits what the Cowboys want, right? Big, long, man coverage corner, can really operate in a silo, doesn't have a ton of experience. That's really the issue here, right? His injuries has kind of derailed his college career, and that's why you didn't see a ton of production. But when he was on the field, he was pretty fantastic. The PFF grades are outstanding for this guy. And I think that he's one of these guys, like right there, you see, really great. He only played in 15 games in the last 2 seasons. He only played in, 16 games in 3 years in college, even though he was a starter. So he definitely, injuries are a thing for sure here. Like that's something that you are incurring the risk on. But man, hear scouts rave about this guy, about his mentality, his story is really, really incredible as well. If I'm not mistaken, had like wasn't he in a? Am I misremembering? Wasn't he in a car accident or something like that?
Yep,
That actually derailed his early part of his career. So yeah, just a guy that, like, when you hear him talked about, it's like glowing, and really the only downside is, unfortunately the guy didn't get to play a lot of football because of obviously a freak car accident, and then an ACL injury kind of really derailed what was going to be a really kind of brilliant career, because this guy is an incredible athlete.
Yeah, I think he's somebody that needs to be on our short list of names. I'm going to give you another one that we haven't mentioned at all through this draft process, and that's Xavier Watts. So I know PFF's a little bit higher on him than we are, but Xavier Watts, if you like defensive backs with ball production, Watts is your guy. He had 13 interceptions over the last 2 years. 13. If you watch the 2023 game, the USC game, where I think he had 3 first half interceptions on Caleb Williams. I mean, just completely fooled him. This is a ball hawk, right? And one of the things that we know is that ball production translates from college to the NFL. The Cowboys don't have a need at safety right now, but if you look forward to 2026 with Donovan Wilson and Malik Hooker being free agents, maybe this is somebody the Cowboys feel like is too good to pass up.
Yeah, I mean, he's just a guy that, and I think that one of the reasons that I was looking at him was I kind of think that he could play some nickel for you, right? Like if you needed him to, could probably reduce down and play some nickel for you earlier, like in his career, while you're still trying to figure out exactly what you want to do with him, with the safety, the older safeties you just mentioned. I think he could come in and potentially be a guy to be a Jordan Lewis replacement if you needed him to. So I really like him as well, as just a guy that, can kind of, there's 2 or 3 of these guys kind of in that range, right? That are like utility, defensive backs that you can kind of plug into a couple different spots. And I like the idea of getting one of those guys, maybe playing him at nickel early while you have a spot there. And then, maybe once Wilson or Hooker goes next year, you have another option if you wanted to put him back there.
I'm going to give you a different name, Mason Taylor, tight end from LSU. Now, again, I can hear you, listeners, screaming at me through your headphones about the Cowboys drafting another second-round tight end. But it seems like Lunda Wells, the Cowboys tight end coach, really likes him. He went down to LSU's pro day to work him out. He's been somebody that's been shooting up the consensus board. This is the son of Hall of Fame edge rusher Jason Taylor, and you see it on the tape, like just a very well-rounded tight end who got better and better each year. He was fantastic at the Senior Bowl, did really well in all the combine on-field workouts, and then he goes to the pro day and does, I think he runs a 4.65. Mason Taylor is an ascending tight end that I think I wouldn't be surprised if he's a much, much better NFL player than he was college player.
Yeah, I definitely, I mean, definitely a great receiving target as a tight end, a great athlete. I'd like for him to be more physical. I think that's the thing. And it's a little bit surprising, being the son of Jason Taylor, that he isn't a little bit more physical. So I think that's my only issue with him, is that, as a run blocker, he still has a ways to go. I think as a pass catcher, he offers you something. I mean, there's a reason that he's part of the reason that this tight end class is so deep, right? Like that you can get a guy like this in the second round, or in the late second round, probably in an area where you probably wouldn't be able to get that guy in another draft.
All right, let's take Siobhan Ravel and move on to the third round. I do think that's I don't want to say a realistic pick for the Cowboys, but I do think that's somebody that will be on their short list of names if he were to be available. Now we're at pick 76, the Cowboys' third round pick. And this is where I think things could get a little wonky. Like usually we're looking at like running backs or linebackers. I wouldn't be surprised if this is the round, Landon, that throws us a big curveball.
Yeah, potentially, just because, as you get further and further away from the top, obviously the consensus really starts to spread out here, right? So there could be any number of names here, including Trey Harris. We keep hearing his name mentioned.
Oh, wait, I thought he would be gone by 44. I'm sorry.
I heard there's no way that he would be there at 44. So here he is at 76. Listen, I think we've talked a lot about the Jalen Knowles. I think we've talked about RJ Harvey. I think, one of the guys that I looked at, or one of the positions, I'm sorry, that I've kind of started to look at a little bit here. And it's unfortunate because one of the guys that I wanted to look at just got taken right before us. And that's CJ West. And the position is defensive tackle. I think that there are a couple of interesting guys that fall to you in the third round in the area of specifically run stuffing nose tackles, right? Like if you wanted to get a guy to come in and be either a starter or part of a rotation, I think you still need one more defensive tackle to kind of fill out that rotation. So I find some interesting guys here that kind of fall into that range. There's also some interesting guys at the wide receiver position. If you hadn't already got your wide receiver yet, I think, we've talked about Knoll. He's usually kind of around in this position. Savion Williams, who's we're looking at right now, is a guy that the Cowboys have had conversations with. He's kind of more of a gadget player, I would say, than a true wide receiver in a lot of ways. So there are definitely lots of interesting. Who are some names that you kind of look at?
I got
here?
one right here. Andrew
boy.
Mukba, I think is how you say his last name. He's the best hitter in this class. I mean, by far the best hitter in this class. And he also has some turnover production that you like to see, some ball production. I mean, you watch some of these games, and there's a couple of hits against Georgia where he just levels guys. I mean, he is a enforcer in the secondary. And again, the same logic with Xavier Watts. Like, there's not a need right now, but there could be one here in a year. You draft this guy on in round 3. We know he's going to be a 30 visit for the Cowboys. We haven't talked about it. I think he's somebody that we need to consider as a potential option here, and maybe in round 3, round 4.
Yeah, and again, we've talked about this before. Maybe we haven't mentioned it in a while, but the Cowboys do like to look a year ahead at contracts and see what positions are up. So it's not unusual for them to not just draft for needs this year, but view what could be coming up in free agency the following year and getting ahead of that by drafting guys to kind of fill those holes early.
Yeah, I believe it's Makuba. I think I mispronounced it. Andrew Makuba. That's going to be our pick as we transition into day 3. Again, we're just trying to get some fresh faces in some of these mock drafts. We'll finish out our mock draft next. Welcome back to the Locked On Cowboys podcast. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen of the day. For your second listen, check out the Locked On NFL Draft Show with Damian Parsons and Keith Sanchez. Now that the season is over, get the latest draft rankings, rumors, and news every day, and find Locked On NFL Draft on YouTube or wherever you listen to your podcasts. All right, so we're finishing out day 3. We're not going to make every pick here, but we just wanted to go over some names that we haven't mentioned enough that could potentially be targets for the Dallas Cowboys. So we're here picking in round 5. Our guy Quinn Ewers at the top of the board, available if you want him. What positions do you think land in here on day 3? Could the Cowboys maybe throw some numbers at that we're not considering?
Well, I think I think there is a possibility, and we should prepare ourselves for this possibility, that the Cowboys don't take a running back in the first 3 rounds. So there could be a possibility that we may need to look at some of the later round running backs a little bit. We have done that a little bit already and talked about some of them, but it may be worth discussing some of those guys. I also think that I've been looking at kind of linebackers and tight ends, because I think that those are positions in which you kind of just could use bodies because of special teams and that sort of thing. And those are also positions that we haven't really looked at a ton. And here you are clicking on Kyle Williams. But
So,
let's talk
I
about
make my
Kyle
pitch
Williams.
for Kyle Williams?
Yes, please.
He's not going to be available in the 5th round. So this is an option maybe you're talking about in the 3rd round, but there's not a better route runner in this class than Kyle Williams. Now, he's a little bit older. He's a 5th-year senior. But if you watch his routes at the Senior Bowl, I mean, he was cooking all of those defensive backs. He played the outside. He played in the inside. His release packages are the best in the class. My comp for him is Emmanuel Sanders coming out of SMU. Just one of these guys that is really fast, but also quick and twitchy. But he's also got a little bit of size. He's not small, and that's pretty rare for these guys. 6 foot 186 think he ran a 4.41 at the NFL Combine.
Yep.
To me, like there aren't very many receivers on day 2 and day 3 that I think can come in and help the Cowboys. I think this is one because he could play on the outside or in the slot.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure it was either Steve or Sam on the Check the Mic podcast compared him to Amari Cooper. Just because similar size, but
He's
build
so
styles,
good at
very
creating
smooth.
separation. Yeah.
Yeah, and so I see it, and I certainly am a guy. I think listen, if you want to take him here just because he fell here, let's do it.
Done.
Like, yeah, that's easy.
Let's
And
go to
then,
running back because I think running
yeah.
back is a position where I won't be shocked, Landon, if they wait till day 3 to pick their running back.
Well, and even if they don't wait until day 3, I wouldn't be surprised, if they potentially double dipped, right? And
Sure.
took one anyway. So I think it's certainly worth mentioning. And I think to me, the two guys I like the most here, obviously, are Jordan James and Kyle Monaghanai. I think that those are both, even though like they're both kind of not of a type necessarily, they're both like very kind of well-rounded running backs. I do like them as alternative guys. Like, I mean, maybe they don't necessarily fit the traditional Thunder or Lightning style, right? They are more of a balanced back who just isn't kind of the same quality as some of the topper guys. But I think you could get Jordan James, and if you needed him to come in and start a game for you or two, I think he could do everything you would need him to do, and he wouldn't kill you, right? And I think that there's like several of those guys. Monaghanai is another guy who just runs violently, will run through tackles, and just kind of do a lot of the simple stuff. Maybe he doesn't, move the needle a ton. Maybe he doesn't break a ton of tackles, but he's a guy that will, pick up a first down on 3rd and 1, or not miss his assignment in pass protection. And I think those guys have value as well. And a lot of times they have more immediate value than anyone else you're able to get kind of on these day 3 picks.
I don't know how many day 3 running backs I feel good about, like day 1 starters.
Yeah.
But there are a lot of running backs that I feel good about. Okay, hey, you can be a part of a committee. Like come in and do your role, whether that's Taj Brooks being like your short yardage running back, or Jordan James kind of being your between the tackle guy, and Brashad Smith from SMU, your space running back, right? Like more like the Tony Pollard role in 2019, 2020. And that's where I feel good about these running backs. So like, yeah, maybe they don't. One of my favorite scenarios is like grabbing DJ Giddens, the running back from Kansas State, who we've talked about a little bit, who I've got in the Cowboys, like grabbing Giddens in round 3 and then another one of these running backs on day 3. And all of a sudden, this is just your backfield for the next 4 years. I love that strategy.
Yeah, and the thing that's great too about this class specifically is that there's both the Thunder and the Lightning early and late, right? Like you can get Lightning guys later, which you normally can't. Like you could go get the kid from Georgia, or the kid from Arkansas, or the USC running back. Like these are all guys who I'm sorry, I should be saying names. Etienne and
Woody
Mays from USC, and then the Rocket. I can't remember the Arkansas running back's name is, but these are all guys who really move. The Arkansas kid's big too, honestly.
Jaquindon Jackson.
So I think these are all guys who I think you could, no matter what you get early, you should be able to pair with some other type of running back that you can find a little bit later in the draft as well.
Yeah, even Rocket Sanders from South Carolina.
Yeah, he can.
Ollie Gordon, who I don't love, but I think Ollie Gordon can
as
give
a Thunder. As a Thunder,
perfect.
Someone's Lightning, beautiful. Yeah.
So I do think there's some value here. At some point, the Cowboys are going to take a quarterback. I don't want to have a discussion on these quarterbacks right now.
Well, but listen, we should throw out the name, Shook, right? Because he is a name. I think he's not being mentioned with the Cowboys, but to me, he's the best fit for what the Cowboys need, right? Like I understand the knock on him is that he's old, but I don't care. He's playing backup quarterback, right? And the other knock on him is that he can't stay healthy. I really don't care. He's playing backup quarterback. Like I think as far as a guy that like, if something were to happen to Dak and he had to finish the game, I think this is one of the few guys that could come in and not, screw it up for you early in his career, because he's just been around a lot. He hasn't played a ton of football because of the injuries, but he's at least, an older player that you feel like maybe you could trust to run an offense.
It's just, where do you draft him? Because I know some people are mentioning him as like, hey, maybe he goes to the back end of round 1, or maybe he goes in round 2, that's just too high. But if he's somebody that's available on day 3, I think totally different conversation.
Absolutely. I think he's, so certainly worth someone mentioning. That's all.
All right. That is it for today's show. We finished the mock with Mike Green, Siobhan Ravel, and who was our? Oh, was the safety from Texas, Andrew
Makubu.
Makubu.
Oh yeah, that's right. Makubu.
We'll get it, but see, this
We'll
is the
get
thing.
it down.
We just need Dane's draft guide to come
That's
out
right.
so we can finally get all these pronunciations right. I promise we will. That's it for today's show. Make sure you download the podcast wherever you get your podcasts. We are free and available on all platforms. Check out the show again on YouTube. Follow Landon on Twitter at McCoolBCB. I'm at Marcus_Mosier. Enjoy your weekend, and we'll see you right back here on Monday.